Hello and welcome to this special program, a year-end edition of World Panorama, a look back at 2015. Over the next hour, we'll be looking at many of the ups and downs across the world this last year. Regions of conflict and tension, newsmakers who made a splash, to the biggest issues and much more. I'm Vaibhav Varma. Our top story, perhaps the dominant theme of 2015, has been the rise of terror, almost as an everyday word. And little has symbolized terror in 2015 more than the Islamic State terrorist group, its brutality and its dangerously expanding reach. In the last year or so, the IS has grown beyond its original home in Syria and Iraq, extending operations to other parts of the Middle East and North Africa by establishing alliances and absorbing other groups. It has claimed responsibility for carrying out attacks across this region. More notoriety as the face of global terror. More brutality, more mass killings, more abductions and beheadings. 2015 marks expansion of the Islamic State in all of these areas. In March this year, days after an attack in Tunisia, 4 suicide bombers detonated their explosives at 2 mosques in Sana'a in Yemen, killing at least 137 people, wounding more than 300. Later in June, a gunman opened fire on beachgoers at a resort frequented by Europeans in what is widely seen as a campaign to devastate Tunisia's tourism industry. Many of the dead and injured were from Britain. A suicide bombing in Suruç district in Turkey killed 32 people and injured 104 in July. This was possibly the first planned attack by the IS on Turkish soil. The bombing resulted in a new escalation between Turkey and the Islamic State. Turkey began carrying out bombings against the Islamic State and PKK in Syria. Later in October, a suicide bomb at a peace rally in Ankara in Turkey killed at least 100 people. More than 400 others were injured. The twin explosions ripped through a crowd of activists outside the main railway station in the Turkish capital. The Ankara bombings were the deadliest in Turkey's history. In November, assailants in twin suicide bombings targeted a southern suburb in Beirut city in Lebanon, where many loyalists of the powerful Shiite Hezbollah militia lived. Hezbollah is fighting along Syrian government forces against the Sunni-led rebellion in Syria. 43 people were killed in the attacks. The day after the Beirut attack, a bloody siege across central Paris killed at least 132 people, wounded scores more, and sharply raised the terror threat confronting Europe. Terrorists sprayed bullets on people at 8 big entertainment centers across the city. Decrying an act of war, French President François Hollande warned of a major escalation in the fight against the Islamic State. French fighter planes and cruise missiles were deployed against the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha Television. Havoc wrought by the Islamic State this year went further with a barrage of terror attacks around the world by outfits other than the IS. There's no denying that many of them are linked, one often merging into the other or into the Islamic State itself. The attacks have been big ones or small ones at key targets, all looking to send out a message and killing innocent civilians in the process. Here are just some of them.
The Boko Haram terrorist group that operates in North Africa was the biggest terror player in 2015 in terms of numbers killed. In the first few days of the year, between January 3rd and 7th, Boko Haram militants carried out a series of massacres in Baga in Nigeria and surrounding villages, killing more than 2,000 people. The groups carried out similar massacres throughout the year in Cameroon, Borno and parts of Nigeria, killing hundreds of villagers. In March, the Islamic State became an ally of the Boko Haram, effectively annexing the group. Twelve people were killed on January 7th when two Islamist gunmen burst into the Paris office of French satirical weekly Charlie Hebdo, opening fire in revenge for the publication of satirical images of the Prophet Muhammad. A total of 17 people were killed in 3 days of violence before police killed the suspected gunmen after they took hostages at a printing factory northeast of Paris. On April 2nd, Al-Shabaab gunmen killed 148 people in an attack on Garissa University in northeast Kenya, the worst militant attack in the East African nation in almost 2 decades. Students' clothes and shoes were scattered around the heavily damaged campus. Bullet holes were seen in the walls of dormitories. Walls and floors were still stained with blood. Kenya has struggled to stop the flow of militants and weapons across its porous 700-kilometer border with Somalia, and the violence has also damaged the economy by scaring away tourists and investors. On December 2, 2015, in San Bernardino, California, 14 people were killed and 22 seriously injured in a terrorist attack which consisted of a mass shooting and an attempted bombing. Syed Rizwan Farooq and Tashfeen Malik, a married couple, sprayed bullets at a gathering of nearly 80 people at a county training event and holiday party. The FBI's investigation revealed that the perpetrators were homegrown violent extremists inspired by foreign terrorist groups and radicalized by them. The couple had amassed a large stockpile of weapons, ammunition and bomb-making equipment in their home.
(2015) also saw the biggest migrant crisis Europe has seen since the 1940s and World War II. Thousands of people pouring into the European mainland from North Africa, Syria and Afghanistan, braving dangerous sea voyages and treks as they look to begin life afresh. Capsizes in the Mediterranean for flimsy sea boats killed hundreds. For these migrants, as well as for European nations facing this massive influx, it's been trying times. The tragic symbol of the migrant storm of 2015. This chilling photograph of a 3-year-old Syrian boy dead on a Turkish beach shocked the world in September, already grappling with images of the migrant and refugee crisis. The boy died during the crossing, along with his 5-year-old brother and his mother. They were among many who undertook a torturous journey over the high seas, using dangerous sea routes to reach Europe. Most had fled Syria's 4-year civil war. Sympathy and outrage arose at the perceived inaction of developed nations in helping thousands of refugees. Just before this, in August, 71 migrants were found dead in a truck on an Austrian highway. For months, Italian and Greek coast guards have been recovering dead bodies at sea, and anonymous corpses have washed up on Europe's shores. The migrants, mainly from war-torn Syria and Iraq, Afghanistan and poor sub-Saharan Africa, entered the European Union through Greece and Italy after crossing the Mediterranean in boats from Turkey and North Africa. United Nations Refugee Agency UNHCR said more than 3,400 people lost their lives or have been reported missing as they seek to reach Europe. Yet over 500,000 migrants and refugees have entered the EU since the start of the year, and thousands will continue to try their luck. With no solution to the conflict in sight, European leaders invited African and Middle Eastern countries to discuss the crisis at a summit in Malta on November 11th and 12th. The crisis is threatening to dismantle Europe's open internal borders agreement, and Europeans want to find a way to stem the migration flows. Germany has been the biggest magnet for the refugees. The German government estimates that 800,000 to 1 million refugees and migrants arrived in 2015, twice as many as in any prior year. German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who first made it clear that the country will not close its borders to those fleeing war, is now facing a political backlash after the crisis opened a rift among the ruling coalition parties. The European Union met with Balkan leaders in October and agreed on a 17-point plan to cooperate on managing flows of migrants through the Balkan Peninsula. Among measures agreed were that 100,000 places in reception centres would be made available along the route from Greece towards Germany, half of them in Greece and half in countries to the north. The UN Refugee Agency would help establish them. The leaders also agreed that the EU border agency Frontex would step up activity on the Greek-Macedonian border to ensure people trying to cross would be registered. November 13, 2015. Like so much else, the multiple terror attacks in Paris was something of a turning point on the migrants' front too. Insecurities and fears mounted among EU nations of the migrant influx also bringing with it terror elements. Poland was among the first to shut its doors, Macedonia ready to put up a fence to bar the influx, Czechoslovakia hit out. It became an onslaught the EU Commission and others eagerly sought to dispel. Fences put up by Macedonia, expulsion of migrants and such measures led to clashes between migrants and police in some countries. The European Union also wants Turkey to keep the migrants from entering the EU and take back those rejected by Europe. As an incentive, it has offered Turkey the prospect of faster progress on its bid to join the EU and on visa-free travel to the EU. Whatever the outcome of the various summits, regular and emergency meetings, many will still be willing to undertake the long and perilous journey to reach safety and a better economic future. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha Television. And we'll step into a short break here. On the other side, we look at some of the world's biggest conflict zones this year. Syria and Iraq definitely top that list, besides Yemen and others. There's that and more still to come. Don't go away. Welcome back. 2015 was also a year of landmark developments in the geopolitical arena. The signing of the landmark Iran nuclear deal, a new beginning to US-Cuba ties strained for decades, and a milestone achieved towards taking on the spectre of climate change. US President Barack Obama and his Cuban counterpart Raul Castro shook hands at the Summit of the Americas on April 10th, a symbolically charged gesture as the pair sought to restore ties between the two Cold War foes. The next day, the two men sat side by side to hold talks, the mood cordial but businesslike. Apart from a couple of brief informal encounters, leaders of the US and Cuba have not had any significant meetings since the Castro brothers toppled US-backed dictator Fulgencio Batista and then steered their Caribbean country into a close alliance with the Soviet Union. On July 20th, the Cuban flag was raised over Havana's embassy in Washington for the first time in 54 years, as the United States and Cuba formally restored relations. In Havana, a lone Cuban flag was raised outside the U.S. Embassy. The Stars and Stripes were raised at a visit by U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry on August 14th. On July 14th, Iran and 6 major world powers reached a nuclear deal formally called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA. The deal caps more than a decade of negotiations with an agreement that could transform the Middle East. Under the deal, sanctions imposed by the United States, European Union and United Nations against Iran would be lifted in return for Iran agreeing to long-term curbs on its nuclear program. Tehran needs to decommission over 10,000 centrifuges, ship 98% of its enriched uranium out of the country, and re-engineer a nuclear reactor so that it cannot produce weapons-grade plutonium. Iranians rejoiced at now realistic possibilities of coming closer to developed nations and a break from decades of animosity with the United States. The final round of talks involved nearly 3 weeks of intense negotiations between U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif. October 18th was Adoption Day for the nuclear deal with Iran. Officials of the International Atomic Energy Agency (IAEA) began the process of checks toward certification that Iran has met initial requirements under the JCPOA. Actual sanctions relief would come about from all parties after the certification process is complete. Leaders of more than 150 countries gathered at the United Nations headquarters in New York in September to officially adopt a new set of Sustainable Development Goals. The goals are directed at combating poverty, inequality and climate change. Adoption of the goals is seen as the most comprehensive international effort ever to tackle the world's ills. The document, titled Transforming Our World, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, outlines 17 broad goals and sets 169 specific targets. The global goals are designed to provide a roadmap for countries to finance and shape government policies over the next 15 years. Targets are to be monitored and reviewed using a set of global indicators to be agreed by March 2016. Implementation is expected to cost $3.5 trillion to $5 trillion every year till 2030. The Sustainable Development Goals, also known as the Global Goals, build on the Millennium Development Goals or MDGs. The new SDGs go much further than the MDGs, addressing the root cause of poverty and the universal need for development that works for all people. On December 12th, 195 countries signed a historic accord to hold global temperatures to a maximum rise of 1.5 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial levels. The legally binding climate deal aims to stave off the worst effects of catastrophic global warming. In order to reach the long-term goal, countries agreed to set national targets for reducing greenhouse gas emissions every 5 years. More than 180 countries have already submitted targets for the first cycle beginning in 2020. Only developed countries are expected to slash their emissions in absolute terms. Developing nations are encouraged to do so as their capabilities evolve over time. Countries agreed to raise $100 billion a year by 2020 to help poor countries adapt their economies and accept a new goal of zero net emissions by later this century. This first universal climate deal will see an accelerated phase-out of fossil fuels, the growth of renewable energy streams, and powerful new carbon markets to enable countries to trade emissions and protect forests. Also in December, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan and India agreed to join hands for the Tapi gas pipeline project, aimed at creating an economically integrated region stretching from the Bay of Bengal to the Caspian Sea. Vice President Hamid Ansari, Pakistan Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, Presidents of Afghanistan Ashraf Ghani and Turkmenistan Gurbanguly Berdi Mohammedov signed a memorial note and shoveled earth to signify the beginning of the Tapi gas pipeline construction. The 1,814-kilometer Tapi pipeline, named after the countries it is designed to cross, is expected to be operational by 2019 at an estimated cost of up to $10 billion. And on the same front, the bad just got worse this year. The multi-layered conflict in Syria sunk deeper into destruction than mayhem, making the country an even bigger theatre of war. Neighbouring Iraq also burns on amid conflict between the government and security forces. Yemen to Afghanistan to Ukraine fall under similar categories. Let's look back at some of the big conflict zones across the world this last year.
Fighting rages across much of Syria in a 4.5-year-old civil war that has killed 250,000 people. More than 11 million others have been forced from their homes, as forces loyal to President Bashar al-Assad and those opposed to his rule battle each other, as well as jihadist militants from Islamic State. The conflict has acquired sectarian overtones, pitching the country's Sunni majority against the president's Shia Alawite sect and drawn in neighboring countries and world powers. The rise of the jihadist groups, including Islamic State, added a further dimension. Iran and Russia have propped up the Alawite-led government of President Assad and gradually increased their support. The Islamic State terror group has further fortified its self-styled caliphate, expanding its violent control over pockets in the country. IS militants destroyed among the most precious archaeological treasures of Syria in August, the 1st century temple of Baal Shamin in Palmyra. The ravaging of irreplaceable antiquities in Syria and Iraq by the Islamic State has become something of a grim wartime routine, bringing scholars and lovers of his priceless heritage to a new level of despair. After attacks by the Islamic State in Turkey, Ankara has also joined the US-led coalition in carrying out airstrikes. In September, Russia launched airstrikes in Syria, in its biggest Middle East intervention in decades, plunging the 4-year-old civil war into a volatile new phase. 2015 started on a bad note for Iraq. A suicide bombing in Yusufia, setting the stage for more violence. Similar bomb attacks took place in Baghdad and surrounding areas through the year. It was also a year of pitched battles for control of various areas. Early in the year, Iraqi forces captured Diyala province from the Islamic State. Through March and April, fighting raged for control of Tikrit. It was eventually recaptured by the army in April after nearly a year under Islamic State control. Also in March, Islamic State fighters looted Nimrud in one of their several assaults on some of the world's greatest archaeological and cultural treasures. The militants destroyed priceless architectural ruins using sledgehammers, electric drills and saws, blowing up one site with a large amount of explosives. In May, the Islamic State captured Ramadi, the capital of Anbar province, a huge loss for government forces. IS also captured the Baji oil refinery after a flurry of killings. On Eid ul-Fitr, more than 120 people were killed in Khan Bari Saad. About 500 people were killed in the fight for Ramadi, and between 6,000 and 8,000 people fled in July and August. Displaced families gathered outside Baghdad, waiting to cross the Euphrates River towards the capital. Iraqi forces recaptured the Baji oil refinery in October. Kurdish forces seized Sinjar, that was captured by the Islamic State in August last year. On 20th of January, Houthi rebels battled their way into Yemen's presidential palace. President Hadi, an ally of the West and staunch supporter of US drone attacks on Al-Qaeda fighters in Yemen, had been increasingly at odds with the Houthis over a draft constitution intended to end decades of conflict and underdevelopment. Days later, thousands took to the streets to protest against the Houthis. Saudi Arabia shelled Houthi positions in Yemen with heavy artillery in April as fighting continued in the region. Saudi Arabia has led an alliance of Sunni Arab countries in airstrikes against the Iran-led Shiite Houthi rebel group and army units loyal to ex-President Ali Abdullah Saleh. The war threatens to turn Yemen into a failed state and spread sectarian strife in the Middle East, where the regional heavyweights, Sunni Muslim Saudi Arabia and Shiite Iran, are vying for influence. Violence continued in eastern Ukraine as a spillover from 2014. Moscow denied sending forces and weapons to East Ukraine, despite what the West says is irrefutable proof. Heavy fighting between Ukrainian army units and pro-Russian separatists continued around Mariupol, the strategic railway hub of Debaltseve, and Donetsk in the east of the country. Leaders of Russia, Ukraine, France and Germany met in Minsk to try to hammer out a peace plan to end the conflict. Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko, Russia's Vladimir Putin, German Chancellor Angela Merkel and French President François Hollande agreed on a peace deal. The agreement included a ceasefire that would come into effect on 15th of February, followed by the withdrawal of heavy weapons. But both sides were accused of breaking the ceasefire in the coming days. The destruction of Donetsk airport was a stark reminder of the havoc that the conflict has already caused. A UN report said the Taliban insurgency has spread through more of Afghanistan this year than at any point since 2001. The UN assistance mission evacuated several of its officers too. Amid widespread violence inflicted by the Taliban militia around the country in the form of repeated suicide attacks in Kabul and other cities, there were glimmers of hope in the first ever government-Taliban peace talks, though that did not extend into the second round. The Heart of Asia conference in December called for talks between all parties as the road to peace in Afghanistan. But the Taliban onslaught remained the dominant theme. The insurgents captured the strategic Kunduz town in the north. It was recaptured with the help of US forces. The Taliban also struck at the highly protected Kandahar air base, killing nearly 40. All sending a message to President Ashraf Ghani that he still had to do a lot to rein in their bells.
If there are bigger theatres of war, there are others that are simmering, ready to blow completely out of control. Some have very recent beginnings, arising out of emerging geopolitical differences. Others go back decades, flaring up and taking on ugly proportions from time to time. Take a look.
Turkey's shooting down of a Russian bomber plane on 25th of November as it allegedly trespassed into its territory while on a bombing mission to Syria raised a huge storm. Since then, Ankara and Moscow have traded bombs, introduced retaliatory measures and made calculated threats at one another. Russia said it would not retaliate militarily but would ensure Turkey suffered for what President Putin termed a stab in the back. As fellow NATO members justified Turkey's stand, Russia slapped economic sanctions on Turkey and questioned its stand against the Islamic State. The decree also called for an end to charter flights between the countries and suspended the visa-free agreement for Turks visiting Russia. On 13th of December, Russia said one of its warships fired warning shots at a Turkish fishing boat in the Aegean Sea to avoid a collision.
Frictions in the South China Sea have sparked concern that the area is becoming a flashpoint with global consequences. China further backed its expansive claims this year with island building and naval patrols, while the US says it opposes restrictions on freedom of navigation and unlawful sovereignty claims by all sides, but seen by many as aimed at China. In April, satellite images showed China building an airstrip on reclaimed land in Spratly Islands. That extended into October when the US sailed a guided missile destroyer within 12 nautical miles of the artificial islands, the first in a series of actions planned to assert freedom of navigation in the region. China warned that the US should not act blindly or make trouble out of nothing. The United Nations has warned that a deadly surge in violence between Israelis and Palestinians is leading them towards a catastrophe. Ongoing violence in the 6-decade-old conflict is taking a toll on Bethlehem's Christmas tourism. Violent incidents have become a daily occurrence in the West Bank, Israel and Jerusalem in the past 2 months, as an increasing number of Jews visited East Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, Islam's third holiest site, which is also revered by Jews as Temple Mount. 172 attacks against the Jerusalem border police and SWAT teams were recorded in the first 6 months of 2015. Since October, Israeli forces have killed 106 Palestinians, 65 of whom Israel says were assailants or had been caught on camera carrying out assaults. Most of the others were killed in clashes with police or troops. 1 US citizen and 19 Israelis have been killed in Palestinian attacks. World leaders want to revive Israeli-Palestinian negotiations that collapsed in April 2014 to avoid a deeper slide into violence that many fear could lead to a third Palestinian intifada. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
– 2015 saw some landmark elections and election campaigns around the world, some of which overhauled national trajectories. Take a look back at some of them.
Greeks took to the polls on the 25th of January for an election that would see a decisive victory for the left-wing Syria party. Thousands flocked to the streets to celebrate and cheer for leader Alexis Tsipras. Addressing the crowd of flag-waving supporters, Tsipras claimed a mandate to overturn the painful austerity policies imposed on Athens by international creditors. He was sworn in as Prime Minister the next day. Again in September, Tsipras stormed back into office with an unexpectedly decisive election victory in Greece's 5th election in 6 years. Voters gave Tsipras and his Syria party the benefit of doubt over a dramatic summer U-turn when he ditched his anti-austerity platform to secure a new bailout and avert Grexit, a Greek exit from the Eurozone. Israel's March 17 election saw a surprise win for sitting Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu after his Likud party made a shift to the right. In the final days of campaigning, Netanyahu abandoned a commitment to negotiate a Palestinian state, the basis of more than 2 decades of Middle East peacemaking, and promised to go on building settlements on occupied land. Nearly 72% voters had turned out to vote, the highest in 15 years. British Prime Minister David Cameron swept to a stunning election victory on the 7th of May, confounding forecasts that the vote would be the closest in decades. Cameron won 331 out of the 650 parliamentary seats and a new term as head of a majority centre-right Conservative government. The scale of his triumph surpassed his party's most optimistic projections. The victory cut short the careers of his top 3 rivals and put the country's European Union future in doubt. Turkey's ruling AK party lost its parliamentary majority in the June 7 polls, dealing a blow to President Tayyip Erdogan's ambitions to acquire sweeping new powers. Instead of the 2/3 majority he had wanted to change the constitution and create a new presidential republic, the AK party, while remaining the biggest party, failed even to achieve a simple majority. Turkey's pro-Kurdish People's Democratic Party entered parliament for the first time after winning 13% of the vote. On the 8th of November, Myanmar voted in a historic first free national election in the country in 25 years. While it was immediately clear that democracy champion Aung San Suu Kyi's opposition party was on course for a landslide victory, it was several days before it was confirmed the National League for Democracy had enough votes to elect a president and form a government. Despite the landslide, Suu Kyi cannot become president herself under a constitution drafted by the military. She has said she will run the country anyway through a proxy chosen by her party. Later in November, conservative opposition candidate Mauricio Macri comfortably won Argentina's presidential election, promising business-friendly reforms to spur investment in the struggling economy. Macri won the election by tapping into frustration over anemic growth, high inflation and corruption. He became only the third non-Peronist leader since the end of military rule in 1983. Macri replaced outgoing President Cristina Fernandez.
And we'll take another short break here. Still to come, we'll also be taking a look at some of the big disasters, natural and man-made, of 2015. There's that and much more to come on the other side. Stay tuned. Welcome back. 2015 had its share of ugly human tragedies. There were the natural disasters and calamities on the one hand, earthquakes and floods and more, and several man-made ones too. Air crashes, chemical explosions, stampedes and the like that killed hundreds. Let's take a look back at what we've listed as the worst human tragedies of 2015.
A 7.8 magnitude earthquake hit Nepal on 25th of April, killing more than 8,000 people and demolishing more than 500,000 homes. Video filmed by an American mountaineer showed the moment the earthquake hit a tea house in the village of Kyanjin Gompa in Langtang National Park. Another amateur video showed the moment mountain climbers at the base camp of Mount Everest in the Himalayas ran for cover as an avalanche triggered by the earthquake approached. Among the capital's landmarks destroyed in the earthquake was the 60-meter-high Narahara Tower built in 1832 for the Queen of Nepal. Rescue operations getting underway remain slow as teams struggle to make inroads into remote areas of the Himalayan nation cut off by the earthquake. A string of tremors continue to rock Nepal for weeks to come, instilling fear among people eager to return to their homes. Many camped outdoors. The biggest of these aftershocks was felt on the 12th of May, when tremor measuring 7.3 on the Richter scale results in 218 deaths. 153 of these were in Nepal and 62 in India. "442 people were confirmed killed after a cruise ship capsized during a freak tornado in China's Yangtze River on June 1st. Most of the passengers were elderly tourists. This was the deadliest peacetime maritime disaster in China's history and the worst since the Taiping sank in 1949, killing over 1,500 people. The cruise ship Dongfang Zijing, as well as other Yangtze River cruise ships, had come under increasing government scrutiny in recent years due to the growing tourist industry in China. The inverted ship was fitted with cables and nets and the holes cut in the hull sealed in order to right the ship and resume the search for survivors or bodies. The search yielded only bodies. The search range was subsequently expanded to 1,000 km downstream. Twin blast on the night of 12th August tore through an industrial area of China's Tianjin, near to a port area where toxic chemicals and gas were stored. More than 160 people died. As a result of the blasts, including at least 21 firefighters, dozens of steel shipping containers were crumpled and rows of cars lined at the port were incinerated. Buildings near the blast site were damaged or destroyed, and the people were evacuated from their homes. 2 days later, a fire reignited among already burned out cars. More than 2,000 pilgrims from around the world died in a crush outside the holy city of Mecca on 24th of September. Saudi Arabia came under heavy criticism for its handling of the disaster. Survivors said chaos ensued when one wave of pilgrims found themselves heading into another group going in another direction, moving towards the stoning of the devil ritual near Mina. Safety during the pilgrimage is a politically sensitive issue for the kingdom's ruling Al Saud dynasty, which presents itself as the guardian of Islam and custodian of its holiest site in Mecca and Medina. On 26th of October, a 7.5 magnitude earthquake with epicenter in the Hindu Kush Mountains in Afghanistan struck South Asia. The big one was followed by more than a dozen aftershocks over the next few days. At least 398 people were estimated killed, mostly in Pakistan. Tremors were felt in Pakistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. Most parts of North India and even parts of Nepal and China felt the tremors.
Who were the big movers and shakers of 2015? Personalities who made a difference either through active individual actions, national policy formulations, or making it to the record books with years of dedication and experience behind them. There are some who've been in the news for the wrong reasons too. Let's take a look at some of them.
Pope Francis, the 266th and current Pope of the Roman Catholic Church, stood out for his less formal approach to the papacy than his predecessors, setting in motion a decentralization of authority in the Church. In his papal visits in 2015 to the Philippines and Sri Lanka, South America, Cuba and the US as well as Africa, Pope Francis came across as a revolutionary, a change agent bent on restarting long-stifled conversations on contraception, divorce and remarriage and sexual orientation. The Mass in Manila in January had become the largest papal event in history with around 6 to 7 million attendees. In the United States in September, Pope Francis gave an address to a joint session of the United States Congress, the first Supreme Pontiff to do so. Pope Francis's visit to the Central African Republic in Africa, which is in a state of a civil war, made him the first pope to enter an active war zone. Time magazine named German Chancellor Angela Merkel its 2015 Person of the Year. The board noted her resilience and leadership when faced with the Syrian refugee crisis and turmoil in the European Union over its currency this year. Merkel, elected to her position in 2005, has been called the most powerful politician on the planet and is the first woman to lead Germany. She is the first individual woman to win the title in 29 years. South African Blade Runner Oscar Pistorius and the case against him for allegedly shooting dead his supermodel girlfriend Riva Steenkamp continue to dominate headlines through the year. After frequent delays, in October, Pistorius was released from prison to house arrest. In December, the appeal court overturned the culpable homicide verdict against him and convicted him of murder. He has been bailed to house arrest pending an appeal to the South African Constitutional Court. He is next due in court on April 18, 2016 for possible sentencing. Women's tennis ace Serena Williams was named Sportsperson of 2015 by Sports Illustrated magazine. Williams won 3 major titles, triumphed in 53 of the 56 matches she played, and ranked number 1 for every week of the season for the second straight year. The magazine said it was honouring the 34-year-old icon both for her positively stunning numbers and her pluck in achieving what it called one of the greatest late-career runs in the history of any sport. Queen Elizabeth II became Britain's longest-reigning monarch in over 1,000-year history of the monarchy. On the 9th of September, 89-year-old Queen Elizabeth completed 23,226 days, 16 hours and approximately 30 minutes on the throne, surpassing the reign of her great-great-grandmother Queen Victoria. David Cameron said the service the Queen had given was truly humbling. In London, a flotilla of historic vessels, leisure cruisers and passenger boats took part in a procession along the Thames, and HMS Belfast sounded a four-gun salute.
The world lost some great human beings this year, great leaders and people who made a huge impact on their respective disciplines and in some way or other shaped the future of mankind as a whole. Here are just a few of them.
He can never build a country. It's because of his strict rules. He knows what is best for us.
On 23rd March, Lee Kuan Yew, the statesman who transformed Singapore from a small port city into a wealthy global hub, died at the age of 91.
It's such a loss.
The city-state's Prime Minister for 31 years, Prime Minister Lee was widely respected as the architect of Singapore's prosperity. Mr. Lee oversaw Singapore's independence from Britain and separation from Malaysia. He had been in hospital for several weeks with pneumonia and was on life support. On 29th March, tens of thousands of Singaporeans waving flags braved heavy rain and lined up the streets to catch a last glimpse of the great leader. The nation came to a near halt as Lee's coffin was taken by gun carriage on a 15-kilometer procession through the streets of the country he helped build to his state funeral. Saudi Arabia's King Abdullah, one of the richest men in history, was carried in a simple white shroud to an unmarked grave on the 23rd of January after his death earlier that day. Abdullah, who had ruled since 2005 and was said to be aged about 90, had been suffering from a lung infection. His 79-year-old half-brother Salman was confirmed as the new king. Abdullah, Salman and Mukreen are all sons of founder of modern Saudi Arabia, King Abdulaziz, usually referred to as Ibn Saud, who died in 1953. World leaders travelled to Riyadh to pay their respects and meet with the new king. US President Barack Obama, French President François Hollande, Britain's Prince Charles and Prime Minister David Cameron and Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko were among them. Actor Omar Sharif, best known for his portrayal of Dr. Zhivago and for his work in Lawrence of Arabia, died of a heart attack on the 10th of July. He was 83 years old. Sharif's agent had confirmed in May this year that the actor had been suffering from Alzheimer's disease. Sharif won international fame and an Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actor for his role in Lawrence of Arabia with Peter O'Toole. He later became a huge star in his own right for his portrayal of the title character in the film based on Boris Pasternak's novel Dr. Zhivago. Sharif also portrayed a wide range of dashing and dignified characters.
Thank you for having me. It's been absolutely marvellous.
Legendary cricket commentator and player Richie Benaud passed away on the 21st of April in a Sydney hospital at the age of 84. Benaud had been receiving radiation treatment for skin cancer since November. his family announced that he had died peacefully in his sleep. Bernard was an all-time great all-round cricketer, a crafty leg spinner, an attacking lower-order batsman and a brilliant gully fielder. He was the first cricketer to achieve the Test double of 2,000 runs and 200 wickets. He also played a stellar role in the formation of World Series cricket in 1977, which changed the face of international cricket, and as a television commentator, he became the voice of cricket. He is widely regarded as one of the most influential people in the game's history.
Let's switch gears now to the world of sport. Besides the big moments of major tournaments in a plethora of sporting disciplines, there were plenty of thrills and spills on the sidelines too. Here's recounting some of the highlights in the Politico sports arena in 2015. FIFA President Sepp Blatter and UEFA boss Michel Platini have been suspended for 8 years from all football-related activities following an ethics investigation. They were found guilty of breaches surrounding a $2 million disloyal payment made to Platini in 2011. Both men denied any wrongdoing. Blatter, who's been the FIFA boss since 1998, had already announced earlier in 2015 that he was quitting ahead of February's presidential election. Platini was tipped as a future leader of football's world governing body and had hoped to succeed Blatter. After years of waiting, Floyd Mayweather Jr. defeated Manny Pacquiao on May 2nd in Las Vegas in one of the most lucrative and highly anticipated boxing bouts of the century. Mayweather won the contest by a unanimous decision. The long-awaited showdown generated more than 4.4 million pay-per-view buys, nearly doubling the previous record. The welterweight title unification fight also yielded more than $400 million in domestic pay-per-view revenue. Despite the large amount of hype that surrounded it, critics felt that the bout itself was disappointing. The Council of the International Association of Athletics Federations, IAAF, provisionally suspended the All-Russia Athletics Federation, ARAF, from all international events. This after a World Anti-Doping Agency WADA report that alleged state-sponsored doping, pointing out deep maladies in the system. WADA claimed Russia had been guilty of state-sponsored doping on an industrial scale, and that there had been a cover-up at the highest levels of the IAAF, which had effectively sabotaged the London 2012 Olympics. Following the WADA report, Russian President Vladimir Putin promised action against those guilty of abetting a doping program and instructed the sports ministry to conduct its own investigation. The first ever day-night test match under floodlights was played between Australia and New Zealand in Adelaide. A pink ball was used, as different from red for tests and white for day-night ODIs. That's a departure from the tradition of the red leather ball in tests, prevalent since the 1870s. Following this successful match, Cricket Australia has scheduled another day-night round of the ongoing Sheffield Shield in mid-February. The Adelaide Test witnessed more than 1 lakh fans in the stadium, a record for a non-Ashes test. The world of glamour and showbiz had its own set of controversies, news splashes and newsmakers in 2015. Let's take a look at some happenings that rocked the celebrity world in the last year.
Wayward star of US television comedy 2.5 Men, Charlie Sheen, revealed in November that he was diagnosed as HIV positive some 4 years ago, saying he had been extorted for more than $10 million to keep the information quiet. Sheen told NBC he was speaking out because he was being blackmailed and to refute tabloid reports that he has AIDS and was spreading it to others. Sheen and his doctor declared the star has an undetectable level of the virus in his blood. American comedian Bill Cosby dominated headlines as at least 57 women, including a former Mrs. America, accused him of sexual misconduct and assault dating back to the 1960s. Cosby has been accused of either rape, drug-facilitated sexual assault, sexual battery, child sexual abuse, and/or sexual misconduct. Cosby has denied allegations and has never been criminally charged. The world's highest-paid model, Gisele Bündchen, took her last strut down the catwalk in April at the Sao Paulo Fashion Week, retiring from the runway after 20 years in the fashion industry. The 34-year-old modeled summer dresses for Brazilian label Colchi before making a finale alongside models dressed in jeans and t-shirts printed with sketches of her. Bunchen told Brazilian media that she wants to now focus on print campaigns and spend more time with her young family.
And that's all we have for you on this special year-ender episode. Quite a year it's been, the terror spectre taking on greater dimensions even amid worldwide moves for peace. One takes heart in the fact that the voice of humanity still reigns supreme. As we look ahead now to 2016, wishing you all a happy, prosperous, peaceful New Year. I'm Vaibhav Varma signing off. Goodbye.